Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Evict You Legally? Don't have to ask me twice. I'm a landlord. I rented a house to a well-to-do lady, and instead of the lady moving in, her sister and her drug-addicted sister's drug-addicted boyfriend moved in. It was going fine until the sisters got in a fight and well-to-do sister stopped paying rent. I went to the house and explained to them now it is time for them to move, let's just shake hands and go our own way. I even offered them $500 if they were out by the weekend and the place was broom clean. You got to evict me legally, the boyfriend said. All right then. On maintenance's calls in the previous months, I had always seen drug paraphernalia laying around somewhere. I don't get involved in my tenants' personal lives, so I just let it be. A couple of mornings after my tenants refused to leave, I put a notice in their mailbox dated from the day before telling them that I was going to enter the house to do maintenance. I showed up at 8 a.m. and knocked on the door, no answer. I used my key to open the door and I saw drug paraphernalia on the coffee table. I closed the door and then called the sheriff. A half an hour later, as my tenants were in handcuffs and the male tenant was being put in the squad car, I told him, now you're evicted legally. As it turns out, they both had warrants and their families came and got all their stuff. I have the house ready to rent in about 3 days. The next one is titled, Steal My Inheritance Money? I owe you nothing. My parents were both killed in a hit-and-run car accident when I was 10. My dad was only 39 and my mum 35. Neither of them had relatives who could take me in. We lived in a really small, church-going town where everyone knew one another. My dad had been the heir to a small fortune and so didn't really have to work. He didn't like the big city, so he and my mum decided to move to a small town where he could have an antique store. My mum was into collecting antiques. I would have had to go the orphanage route when they died. But this couple from the church, who I will call Mr. and Mrs. Banks, made this big to-do in church about how a little girl needs a loving home, and God has given us this joyous task of bringing her up in our home and hearts. It's been a long time and I don't remember if those were Mrs. Banks' exact words, but they were something cringe-worthy like that. The Banks had their own daughter, Kitty, who was a year older than me. That should have meant we would be super good friends, but Kitty had her own thing going and practically ignored me. She was a holier-than-thou type. The Banks received a stipend from the state to take care of me, but they also received checks every month from my dad's estate, which was supposed to take care of me until I was 18. When I did turn 18, I would receive full control of my inheritance. The Banks weren't exactly cruel to me, but in private it was clear they were just using me to build up their reputation in town. In front of other people, they'd fawn over me in a sick, cotton candy fashion that made me uncomfortable. They'd also make Kitty be nice to me in public, which she resented. The Banks would also put on a big show whenever social workers came to check up on me. They'd coach me before the lady would come, and tell me to praise how godly and wonderful they were. After the social worker left, they'd go right back to ignoring me and spending my dad's money on crap on the internet or on trips. It was clear to me even as a teen that the Banks were only using some of my endowment, both from the state and from my trust, to take care of me. The rest, they spent on themselves. As I grew older, I could see that my foster parents would pretend as though they had great business acumen, and that's why they had more money and could buy a new Volvo. Where I'm from, a new Volvo is an event, and take a trip to New York and buy fancy clothes for Kitty. When I was 17, I noticed that my foster parents were stockpiling away my trust fund money to pay for Kitty's tuition to college. Throughout this time, the Banks would never outright say so, but would heavily imply that I owed them, and that once I got control of my inheritance, that I should be godly and generous and give them some material compensation for all the work they did to raise me. I think they already got lots of material, especially since Mrs. Banks practically stole all of my mum's antiques from her store and kept them for herself, gave them to Kitty, or to her other relatives. One thing my mum never kept at her store was an extremely expensive, Baroque-era fine china set, absolutely complete and worth tens of thousands of dollars. Not a replica, but the real deal. So real, Napoleon Bonaparte himself might well have eaten a steak off those plates. Probably not, but you get the point. It was my china set, of course, but Mrs. Banks thought I was an idiot and didn't know that. She would always talk about how this china set will go to Kitty on her wedding day. Mrs. Banks assumed that since I always dressed like a tomboy, I didn't care about all my mum's antiques that Mrs. Banks stole or gave away, that I just didn't care about the china set. When I was a kid, my mum told me that things were things, and not to obsess over them. So, having the fro china set for me wasn't an issue. What was an issue was Mrs. Banks acting like it was hers to give away. Wrong, lady. So, once Kitty went off to college thanks to my biological mum and dad's money, I had to make my own plans. I had always done well in school and had actually gotten a partial scholarship to attend school out of state. The rest, I could easily pay for with my inheritance, which I would very soon have control of. Per usual, Mr. and Mrs. Banks were haranguing me about how I owed them compensation, and since I was going to be rich soon I ought to share the wealth. I figured that over the past 7 years they probably stole or misappropriated more than $200,000 of my parents' money, to say nothing of the state money they misused. I think they more than shared the wealth. I never promised anything, I just smiled and kept a tally of every single bank statement, I got them quarterly, that my trust issued over the years. The Banks family never shared them with me, of course, but when I asked the actual bank for a rundown, they were more than happy to oblige. I also wrote down every single major purchase my foster parents clearly made over the past 7 years with money that was clearly beyond their means as a housewife and an insurance salesman. Things such as a $40,000 car for cash, a used $20,000 car for cash that they gave to Kitty, trips to Hawaii, New York, cash gifts to the church that made them look super generous at my deceased parents' expense. I kept it all in a nice 3-ring binder. I already arranged my travel to my new campus. I didn't have much stuff at the Banks' house anyway and had zero intention of coming back, at least to their home. The Banks knew I was leaving but didn't bother seeing me off, because they assumed I'd come back to give them their due. I waited for our church's yearly antique sale extravaganza, set to begin in 3 days. Per usual, the Banks donated all sorts of random stuff, many of it knick-knacks that used to belong to my mum and technically belonged to me. They weren't shy about giving away my stuff and taking credit for it. While Mr. and Mrs. Banks were on one of their shopping sprees with my parents' money and away from their house, I boxed up the china set and brought it to church. I told the rummage sale committee that Mrs. Banks wanted to donate the priceless antiques for sale, all benefits to go to the church. This donation is made in the name of Mr. and Mrs. Banks. I was being fair. If Mrs. Banks was really so godly, she would be delighted that such a wonderful donation be made in her name. Sadly, I knew she'd go the other way because she was faker than implants. The ladies were flabbergasted, especially when I told them the appraisal of the set's value. I also told them that if they needed proof of ownership and right to sell, to contact the number of a certain attorney in New York. They thanked me profusely and praised the Lord Jesus for Mrs. Banks' generosity. This would be the most expensive item in their sales history. Everyone knew no one could afford to buy the set outright, but everyone would love to buy the pieces piecemeal. Like, I got a cup and saucer, or, I got one of the chargers, I got an egg cup. The Banks were supposed to work the sale the second day and I wasn't there. What I did hear was that my foster mum went ballistic when she saw her china set for sale and that it was a huge hit, and ladies from all over the county had bought pieces of it, and it raised so much money for the church. My foster mum threw a tantrum and said that I had stolen the set from her house. The ladies at the church explained that I had made the donation in her name, and she was getting credit for the donation to the church. My foster mum was practically yanking her hair out, according to what I heard later. She was trying to track down who had bought pieces and trying to get them back. Of course, she was unsuccessful. What she was successful in was looking like a grade A douchebag. The entire church thought she was selfish and materialistic and acting very ungodly, especially the way she cursed her foster daughter. A week later, my foster parents received a package by registered mail from me and my attorney. It contained my binder where I showed my bank statements and also a list of all their spending extravagances. It also contained a warning from my attorney that should they ever try to contact me again for money, that they will receive a bill and a court date. That was that. 10 years later, I work as a third-grade teacher. I'm married to an accountant, and we have a 3-year-old son and 1-year-old daughter. Kitty ended up working through college, and as we've gotten older, we've reconnected. She apologized for the way she acted when we were kids. We're friends now, and see each other multiple times a year, often just for lunch. She's an elementary school teacher, too, and married to an engineer. She has a 4-year-old daughter. Both of our older kids play together when our families meet. We both have our own wedding china. She has gone to a lot of therapy due to her toxic parents, she tells me. As for her parents, they still live in their small town because they're too broke to move. Their reputation is of being that couple who drove both their children away and stole money from that poor little girl whose parents died, and they tried to steal money from Jesus when they whined about getting their Baroque china back. I hope your Volvo was worth it, a holes. The next one is titled, The City Screwed Up, and I Got to Sue. Finally. So after a year-long battle, this finally came to a close. Maybe not my revenge, but revenge on my behalf. A little backstory, I bought a house about 5 years ago and in 3 years, flooded 3 times. It never flooded in the 40 years before. Thanks climate change. Finally, after the 3rd flood, my wife and I were financially able to move out and sell the house for a loss. We search around and find our dream house. Or so we thought. After living in the new house for about 6 months, we noticed something very peculiar. Whenever it would rain hard, the bathtub would backfill with sewage and the toilets wouldn't flush. So we called a plumber. The plumbers were awesome and told us that our sewer lines had broken between the house and the city sewer line, and while we could try and spot fix, we would probably need to replace the entire line. Ouch. Having just dumped a bunch of cash on a new house and taking a loss on the old house, we said to try and keep it as cheap as possible. They dug up where the line was broken. Broken is an understatement. The line had all but dissolved. We were going to have to replace the whole line. About $5,000. Not the best time, but okay, let's do it. Once they exposed the line the best they could, I got a call from the plumbers. The line has broken up so badly, they cannot find where the residential line ties into the city line or tap. Now the homeowner is responsible for the residential line, but the city is responsible for the tap and the main line. I as the plumber that is needed. He says we need to get the city plans and dig to uncover the tap. More digging equals more money. At this point, it's been 2 weeks and I just want to pee in my own house and take a shower. Okay, dig the hole. They dig a 4x4x10 hole and find nothing. We double-check the city plans and they are right on where the plans say the tap is. Now we have to deal with the city. We call 311 as directed, and after sitting on hold for 3 hours, a city official sends us the same plans with the location where we dug. We call back and say we already dug there and there is no tap. Getting nowhere with the city, my wife finally goes down to City Hall, and after spending a vacation day, hanging around waiting for someone, she finally gets in to meet with an official. Let's call him Richard. Richard prints off the same plans we have already been given and says we need to dig where it's marked. My wife takes out her phone and says, "Look, it's not there." At this point he mutters to himself and takes out a pen and draws on the plans, marking the actual location. It shows the residential line dog-legging from the original drawings and is about 10 feet west of the initial location. It was apparent that he doesn't want to waste his valuable cushy government job time on my wife. It was pretty obvious he just made something up to get her out of his office. Plumbers come out, dig a second 4x4x10 hole, read more money, and surprise surprise, the tap isn't there either. Fun. Back to City Hall and another vacation day wasted waiting for Richard. At this point, we don't want another hand-drawn map. Someone from the city needs to come out and mark where this damn tap is. They come out and I burn a vacation day to wait around for them. To their credit, they got down in the sewer, did some digging around and mark a new spot between the 2 big holes. Finally. A real location. Plumbers come out and dig the 3rd hole. And if you think they actually found the tap, then you would be mistaken. At this point, the entire backyard is destroyed. Piles of dirt everywhere, the lawn is dead, the trees are dead, it's ruined. Our beautiful new house's backyard is literally crap. Back down to Richard's office, another vacation day burned, and we are livid. We remain calm but insist that we must have not been tied into the city's main line. There was no tap. Now you might be thinking, how did we not know? 6 months of sewage just piled up in your backyard? In the backyard, there is a large dirt mound that had been turned into a nicely landscaped forest. Lots of room to absorb the sewage that only 2 people would produce. But if rained hard, the dirt was saturated and would backfill the bathtub and the toilets wouldn't flush. Richard doesn't accept responsibility but does send out the contractor who did all the work for taps in my area. The contractor comes out and I get the full story. 2 years prior, while the previous owner was doing improvements and not living in the house, the main line of the sewer was replaced. Basically, they slide the new tubing into the old tubing underground and then go in and install new taps for each house. Since no one was living in the house, they couldn't get into the backyard and told the city they did not service our house. I am furious. It's been 3 months, greater than $20,000, and all the wasted time and vacation just because Richard was too lazy to do his job and make one call to the contractor to sort it out. Now, remember how my first house flooded 3 times? I learned my lesson dealing with people, and once we knew we had to talk to the city, we recorded everything. Every phone call, every email, I videoed the contractor and his explanation, everything, and all obtained legally. In my state you have to have both people's consent to be recorded. He installs a tap and I take the first shower at my house in 3 months. I am ready to act. I go down once again to Richard's office. I show him everything and want to file a claim. I agree to cover the cost of the residential line as that is my responsibility. However, I want the city to reimburse the cost to dig the unnecessary holes. I think I have a good case. Pursuant to our city, we had to file a claim before starting any work and provide 3 estimates in writing to file a claim. Since none of that was done and could not be done after the fact, Richard denied the claim right there. Left without words, I walk away completely defeated. I perk up on the way home after calling my wife and being reminded that I have some lawyer friends. Surely one of them could help or knows someone who can. Unbeknownst to me, my state has something called sovereign immunity. Basically you can try and sue the city or state but it will be thrown out immediately, and Richard knows this. No credible lawyer will help me pursue this case because they know I would just be wasting my money. I am pretty much sold. After months of calling around to try and find anyone to help, I have resigned myself to defeat. Almost a year goes by. The loans I took out are about to start coming due and I have no idea how I am going to pay for it. All communication with Richard and his office is blocked. I have also tried his boss and crickets. I tried going back down there, but Richard refused to meet with me. I finally reach out to my council member in a last-ditch effort. I include a synopsis along with all the evidence I have. I don't expect much. 1 hour after hitting send, my phone rings. It is my council member and she is livid about how we were treated. She has a meeting scheduled with the head of public works for later than a week. She doesn't promise anything but says she is going to fight for me until they kick her out of the building. After the meeting, she calls me on her way back to the office. The head of public works has accepted full responsibility. She wants receipts for everything. The plumber, pay stubs showing the vacation we took, phone logs from the time we spent on hold, the quote from the landscaper to fix the backyard, all of it. She has them all in her inbox by the time she makes it back to her office. That was about 3 weeks ago. Yesterday I met with my council member at her office. Me, thank you so much. My wife and I cannot repay you for all you have done. Her, it was my pleasure. We chit-chat for a bit. Her, here is a check for what you are owed. Me, this is so great. We can pay off the loan and finally get someone to fix our yard. Wait, this is much more than we need. Her, you forgot to include emotional distress. I added it in for you. Oh, and if you ever have any issues, you won't have to worry about dealing with Richard, he no longer works there. Just come to me. I have become good friends with the head of public works. Me, oh my god, you are literally the best person I know. If there is anything I can do. Her, elections are in the fall, maybe you could turn out and vote. So I went home, paid off everything, and the landscapers are coming out next week. Oh, and I am volunteering on her re-election campaign. Since Richard didn't go for that, I got him fired and almost $30,000 for the extra work, my wife and I's time and effort, plus emotional distress. The last one is titled, I may be too big to retaliate, but my little brother isn't. Before launching into my petty revenge story, let me just say that I'm not particularly proud of the circumstances or the outcome regarding this revenge, but I'm somewhat impressed by how devious and vindictive my 9-year-old self was. Please forgive the long background story, but I hope that it adequately explains the situation that led me to resort to such drastic measures. My family moved to the United States from Mexico when I was 4, and we moved up to Michigan when I was 7. My mum managed to antagonize the local bully when she caught him bullying one of my sisters, and since he couldn't retaliate directly, he took his frustrations out on me. My thick Mexican accent wasn't doing me any favors, either, and I was beat up a lot. Since I was the oldest kid, my mum liberally incorporated corporal punishment into my education. With so many role models, it's no wonder that my 2 sisters got in on the game, too. One of my sisters was only a year younger than me, so when I responded to her physical aggression in kind, mutual aggression ensued, and we went at it until one of us yielded. One time my mum had to pull her off me because she had bitten through my sweatshirt and t-shirt and broke some skin as well. We each gave as good as we got, so there was no need to get creative with revenge. My youngest sister, however, was another story altogether. She was 3 years younger than me, and for many years she was the family baby. She would often punch me without provocation, and if I retaliated in kind, she would cry at the top of her lungs and bring my mum's wrath down on me. Instead of responding physically, I tried tattling on her, but my mum would half-heartedly tell her to be nicer to me and leave it at that. This continued for years. When I was around 8 years old, my mum unexpectedly got pregnant. I was elated to learn the baby was a boy because I had been outnumbered 2-1 by my sisters, and he was a long-awaited potential ally. Unfortunately, as is often the case, the situation had to worsen before getting better. As soon as my brother was old enough to pull himself up to a sitting position, his crib was moved into my room, and I was tasked with comforting him any time he woke up crying at night. For this reason, I developed a real appreciation for the plight of parents who are nursing infants. Even though I was given this chore at night, my mum took it on herself during the day. For this reason, she looked forward to his daily naps, and one sure way to tick her off was to wake the baby during his nap. Back in the 70s, having a nice stereo system was pretty much a must-have in any suburban home. In addition to being a status symbol, it was decorative and functional. Our super nice stereo system and speakers were conveniently located right next to the door to my room. Given my mum's appreciation for my brother's nap time, I still wonder why she chose to have him nap in my room. This is where my revenge begins. My youngest sister was obsessed with disco, and she listened to the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack on the good stereo every chance she got. My mother often warned her to keep the music down so as not to wake my brother. So it was that after yet another episode where she threw a punch and received no consequences whatsoever, I came to the realization that the best way to counter my little sister with my little brother. My little brother napped every day at around the same time, from noon to 2, and it was almost guaranteed that my sister would be playing her music at some point during his nap. At around 11:45 am, shortly before my brother was about to go down for his nap, I cranked every single frequency on the stereo up to full volume. As expected, she sauntered up to the stereo right in the middle of his nap and pressed the power button without even looking at the volume. The bass reverberated throughout the house, shaking the pictures on the walls, and the music could be heard all the way in my mum's bedroom, on the other side of the house. It was no wonder that my brother immediately woke up and started screaming. My mum was livid, and even though she had never corporally punished my sister before, she more than made up for it on that day. She dragged my sister into her bedroom, and the sounds of slaps and punches were interrupted only by my mum's screams of rage and my sister's cries of pain. I wish I could say that I found satisfaction in my revenge, but in truth, I was horrified at the fury I'd unleashed. I curled up into a fetal position on my bed and tried to ignore my sister's cries and my mother's screams in the other room, as well as my brother's crying. I even considered fessing up to my own part in the matter, but I was too cowardly to take the blows that were being showered on my sister. From that day on, the immunity that my sister had enjoyed as the family baby was gone, and corporal punishment was incorporated into her education as well. Emily Bronte wrote, "Treachery and violence are spears pointed at both ends. They wound those who resort to them worse than their enemies." When I read that quote in high school, I knew exactly what she meant. On the other hand, my sister learned how it felt to be beaten, and she wasn't so eager to punch me anymore. My revenge was a bittersweet success. Thanks for listening.